Political commentator Michael Reagan, also the chair of the Reagan Legacy Foundation. Now, we heard that from the governor there, Michael, and I wanted to ask you, do you think this is a wise decision to kind of send this warning shot to the community? Pardon the pun, that's probably not the best way to say this, but or maybe unnecessary and maybe stirring things up a little bit more?
No, I think it's smart for him to do that, but it is interesting that here in Los Angeles and other communities around the country, this only happens within the African American community. You don't see the police department on horses with riot gear when an Hispanic is on trial, or there's something going on in the grand jury to see if an Hispanic or an illegal is going to be indicted for murder or something. You don't see it within the white community. You only see it in the black community, and that's really unfortunate. So you have your agitators within that community who I think wait and pray for moments like this so they can go out, loot, and burn the city down. I've always been amazed that this group of people, the African American community, end up destroying their own businesses, their own community, and then later on come back to the rest of the community, the Hispanic community, the white community, Asian community, ask us in our taxes to pay to rebuild what they've destroyed. I think it's outrageous.
And as a guy who lives in California, I'm sure you remember very well what happened after the Rodney King verdict. Do you expect any kind of repeat if this grand jury does not hand down some sort of charges against the police officer, Darren Wilson?
Oh, I think this is their pressure. You know, pressuring the grand jury. If you don't do what we want you to do, then we're going to, in fact, riot in the streets of Ferguson, much like what happened out here in L.A. with the Rodney King situation. But again, all the information doesn't get out there. And so the black community does not get all the information. The agitators give them what they want to give them to cause, ultimately, the riots that happen here in Los Angeles and probably may happen again in Ferguson if the grand jury doesn't do what the African American community and their agitators want it to do. So it's pressure on the grand jury. You know, I hope the grand jury gets it right, one way or the other. I hope they get it right. Unfortunately, if they don't indict, I think there will be riots in Ferguson. I think the police department is doing the right thing by preparing itself to, in fact, take care of any rioters.
Yeah, it does seem to be somewhat of a powder keg. Maybe this diffuses the situation. Time will tell. But we do want to turn our attention and change topics a little bit because, of course, we're just celebrating the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And we had speechwriter Peter Robinson on our show talking about your father and the address that he gave to Gorbachev, urging him to tear down the Berlin Wall. Of course, that came prior to the actual fall of the wall. But there was much more to that. We also remember, too, when Brezhnev died, your father sending the message to the Russians, hey, we're sorry about this loss, but this maybe is a chance for us to communicate. Obviously, there was a lot that led up to that moment when the Berlin Wall did fall. President Reagan was no longer president when, in fact, it did come down. But in those moments when you talked to him privately about the fall of the Berlin Wall, what do you remember most about your conversations with your dad about that?
Well, you know, he never really patted himself on the back. I mean, Ronald Reagan never took credit. You know, he allowed other people to take credit for what happened, you know, in the world. He looked at the big picture. I think too many politicians today look at a very small picture that they're in. Ronald Reagan never looked at a small picture that he was in. He looked at the big picture. And so he allowed others to take credit for the wall, in fact, coming down. We give Ronald Reagan credit because he was always about that wall coming down, always about peace and freedom, you know, throughout the world. What's sad is I was there with the Reagan Legacy Foundation on the 20th anniversary when we opened up a Reagan exhibit at the Checkpoint Charlie Museum. And I will tell you, there was no mention on the 20th anniversary of communism, no mention who built the wall, no mention who tore down the wall, no mention of Margaret Thatcher, two small mentions of the Pope. The conquering hero of the 20th anniversary, as the hero of the 25th anniversary, was none other than Mikhail Gorbachev, because he showed up. The reality is that we conservatives talk about Berlin Wall, we talk about what's going on over there, but if we don't show up, then in fact don't sit there and yell and scream on what's going on over there, because the reality of it is that they have a red government in Berlin, and the Czech Republic 2 years ago elected a communist government. That area of the world's not getting better. It's getting worse because we're not there.
That's a good point, too, and we hear more about Russian aggression today. Michael Reagan, thanks so much for being with us. An important reminder, too, about Eastern Europe. We'll be back with more here on America's Forum right after this.